Hi, I'm Luna, and I want to share my story. It's not one that's easy to tell, but it's important. I hope it helps others who might be facing similar struggles. My story begins in Austin, Texas, where I live and work as a high school teacher. I was 32 when I met Daniel, a 34-year-old Uber driver, through a dating service. We hit it off immediately. Daniel had a way of making me laugh, and I was drawn to his easygoing nature. We got married 3 years ago, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. I loved him, and he said he loved me. I was earning more than Daniel, which wasn't an issue at first. He always praised my career and seemed genuinely supportive. But as time went on, I noticed subtle changes in him. Little comments turned into frequent sarcasm, and he started acting more controlling. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just being overly sensitive. Our problems grew as Daniel's behavior changed. He began making expensive purchases without discussing them with me, assuming I would cover the costs. I was shocked when he bought a new TV and a fancy sofa, putting them on our credit card without asking. When I questioned him about it, he shrugged it off, saying, "You make good money, so it should be fine." His parents, too, seemed to have a sudden change in attitude. Initially, they were warm and supportive, congratulating us on our marriage and praising my career. But soon they started asking for money. My mother-in-law would call, saying, "Luna, we've seen a lovely designer bag we'd like, and we thought you could help us out." When I refused, explaining that I didn't lend money to anyone, even family, their reaction was harsh. "How dare you? We agreed to this marriage because of your job, and now you're being stingy." Daniel's parents were relentless. They called often, making demands and accusing me of being a bad daughter-in-law. Daniel, instead of standing up for me, sided with his parents, adding to my stress. His sarcastic comments about my salary and our finances became more frequent, making me question if this marriage was worth it. Despite all this, I kept trying to make things work. I even started considering divorce, especially since we didn't have any kids yet. The thought of leaving Daniel was painful, but it seemed like the only way to escape the growing toxicity in our relationship. Every time I brought up divorce, Daniel avoided the conversation, brushing it aside as if it were not important. One day, everything took a turn for the worse. My father, who had always been my rock, fell seriously ill. He was diagnosed with advanced heart disease, and the doctors said his condition was critical. I was devastated. I rushed to the hospital, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst. When I informed Daniel about my father's condition, his response was chilling. He showed no sympathy and said, "If you want to stress out your already sick father with our divorce, I'm fine with that. We can proceed anytime." I was shocked and heartbroken. How could someone I loved be so callous? As my father's health declined, the tension at home became unbearable. Daniel's attitude grew more indifferent, and his demands became more frequent. He began pressing me about our finances and hinted at how much he could benefit from my father's eventual passing. After my father passed away, I inherited $70,000 from his estate. I decided to keep this inheritance private. I didn't want Daniel to know about it. I feared he would try to manipulate me into giving him the money or using it in ways I didn't agree with. I was still grieving and didn't need additional stress from him. But my attempt at keeping the inheritance a secret didn't last long. Daniel discovered the money after threatening my mother. He coerced her into revealing the details of the inheritance, which was a painful betrayal. Daniel wasted no time in planning how to use the money. He intended to renovate our home without consulting me, assuming that since it was his right, he could do whatever he wanted with it. I was furious. The last thing I wanted was to have Daniel controlling the money that was meant to be a legacy for my father. I decided it was time to confront the situation head-on. But before I could gather my thoughts and discuss it with Daniel, he had already started the renovation plans, using the inheritance money as if it were his own. The situation was becoming increasingly dire. I knew that if I wanted to save myself from further manipulation and greed, I had to act quickly. The once loving and supportive husband I married had turned into a manipulative and controlling man, driven by greed. And his parents, who had once seemed so kind, were now just as bad, if not worse. It was clear that I had to make some difficult decisions. My heart was heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. But I knew that in order to reclaim my peace and integrity, I needed to confront the situation directly. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to find a way out of this mess and protect myself from the toxicity that had taken over my life. Continuing from where I left off, things only got worse after Daniel discovered the $70,000 inheritance. He seemed to think the money was rightfully his to control, and his behavior became increasingly aggressive. I was struggling to manage my grief and deal with Daniel's escalating demands, and I felt trapped. One evening, I came home to find Daniel waiting for me, a smug expression on his face. "Luna, we need to talk about the renovations," he said, his voice dripping with entitlement. I knew he had already started planning, and the thought of him using my father's money without my consent made me fume. "What renovations?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You didn't discuss anything with me." Daniel waved his hand dismissively. "We've been living in that old house for too long. It's time for an upgrade, and I've decided to use the inheritance for it." I felt my heart race. The inheritance is not for renovations. It's my money, and I want to decide what to do with it. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Oh, come on. We both know it's for the benefit of our home. Why are you being so selfish?" I tried to explain that I needed to handle the inheritance carefully and that his actions were disrespectful. But he cut me off. "You're always making everything about you. This money is going to make our home better. Why can't you just support me for once?" Daniel's arrogance was unbearable. He had no respect for the fact that this money came from my father's estate and was supposed to be a tribute to his memory, not a tool for his personal gain. The next few days were filled with tension. I tried to keep a low profile, hoping the situation would somehow resolve itself. But Daniel's demands and manipulations didn't stop. He began making aggressive phone calls to contractors and started making plans for extensive renovations, using the inheritance money he had no right to. The situation reached a boiling point when Daniel confronted me about the property documents related to the inheritance. He demanded to know where I had kept them, insisting he needed to access the money. I was stunned. How could he be so brazen? "I'm not going to let you control this money," I said firmly. "I'm keeping everything in my name. You have no right to it." Daniel's face darkened. "If you don't hand over the documents, I'll make sure everyone knows how you've been holding out on me. Do you really want to deal with that kind of trouble?" His threats were hollow, but they made me realize just how far he was willing to go. I decided I needed to take action before things escalated further. It wasn't long before Daniel's manipulative tactics took another turn. He started involving his parents more directly in the situation. They began calling me regularly, demanding I hand over the inheritance or they would take legal action. Their tone was accusatory and confrontational, showing no sympathy for my situation. Their demands were so intense that I decided I had to take a stand. I consulted a lawyer to understand my rights and options. I learned that I had legal protections and that Daniel's behavior could be classified as financial abuse. The inheritance, being part of my father's estate, was legally mine to manage. Meanwhile, Daniel's actions became more desperate. He began plotting ways to access the property documents related to the inheritance. He even went as far as to threaten my mother, trying to intimidate her into giving him the information he wanted. It was a new low, and it made me realize just how toxic and dangerous the situation had become. One day, I returned home to find Daniel in the process of tampering with the property documents. He had managed to sneak into my office and was rifling through the files. When he saw me, he tried to cover up his actions with a look of feigned innocence. "I was just looking for something," he said, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. "This is my father's property," I said coldly. "You have no right to it. You're crossing a line." Daniel's face turned red with anger. "You're being unreasonable. This is about improving our life together. Why can't you see that?" "I see it very clearly," I retorted. "You're trying to exploit my father's legacy for your own gain. This has to stop." The confrontation left me shaken but resolute. I knew I had to protect myself and the inheritance from further manipulation. The thought of Daniel using the money for his personal projects, while I struggled to maintain control over something that was rightfully mine, was overwhelming. As I prepared to move forward with the divorce proceedings, I realized I had to deal with the aftermath of Daniel's manipulations. I had to secure the property documents and make sure that nothing was done to jeopardize the inheritance or my father's memory. The situation was reaching a critical point, and I knew that I needed to be strong and decisive. I had to make sure that I didn't let Daniel's greed and manipulation ruin my life any further. The road ahead was going to be difficult, but I was determined to reclaim my peace and protect what was rightfully mine. As I braced myself for the inevitable clash with Daniel, the tension in our home became unbearable. Every day was a struggle, and the atmosphere was charged with hostility. Daniel's actions had reached new lows, and his arrogance was pushing me to the edge. I knew I had to take decisive action before things spiraled further out of control. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, I decided it was time to confront Daniel about his blatant disregard for the inheritance. I found him lounging in the living room, looking relaxed despite the chaos he had caused. His casual demeanor only fueled my frustration. "Daniel, we need to talk," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced up from the television with a dismissive look. "What now, Luna?" "I'm tired of your games," I began. "The inheritance is not yours to use for renovations or anything else. It's my money, and I will decide what to do with it." Daniel rolled his eyes. "You're being unreasonable. We're supposed to be a team. Why can't you just let me make our home better?" "It's not about the house," I replied, fighting to keep my composure. "It's about respect and boundaries. You have no right to claim what doesn't belong to you." Daniel's face hardened. "You're just being selfish. You know how much this means to me. Why are you making this so difficult?" His words stung, but I refused to back down. "I'm not being selfish. I'm standing up for myself. You've already tried to intimidate my mother and tamper with the property documents. I'm not going to let you get away with it." The confrontation left both of us simmering with anger. Daniel stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I was left alone, feeling a mix of fear and determination. I knew I had to follow through with the divorce, but I needed to secure the inheritance first. The following day, things took a turn for the worse. I received a call from my mother, sounding frantic. "Luna, you need to come over right away. Daniel is here, and he's causing a scene." My heart raced as I drove to my mother's house. When I arrived, I found Daniel standing in the middle of the living room, shouting at my mother. The scene was chaotic, and I could see the distress on my mother's face. "Daniel, what are you doing?" I demanded as I entered the room. He turned to me with a look of wild desperation. "I need the inheritance, Luna. This is our chance to fix everything. Don't you see that?" I could barely contain my anger. "You have no right to demand anything from me. This is my father's money, and I'm not giving it to you." Daniel's frustration reached a boiling point. "You're being unreasonable and cruel. I need that money for our future. Why are you making this so hard?" "Because it's not yours to take," I shouted back. "You're making a scene and threatening my family. This has to stop." As Daniel continued to argue, I noticed that he seemed more desperate than ever. It became clear to me that he was losing control and was willing to do anything to get his hands on the inheritance. I realized that I had to act quickly to protect myself and my family. The situation escalated further when I found out that Daniel had stolen the property documents related to the inheritance. He had taken them from my home, hoping to sell the property without my knowledge. I was horrified and felt violated. I contacted my lawyer immediately and informed him of the theft. He advised me to file a police report and take legal action to protect the property. I followed his advice, and the authorities began investigating the situation. The thought of Daniel potentially getting away with his deceit was unbearable, but I knew I had to see this through. Despite his attempts to manipulate and intimidate me, Daniel's plans were thwarted. It turned out that the property title was still in my father's name, making it impossible for him to sell it without legal complications. This news seemed to deflate him, and he began to backtrack, attempting to reconcile. One day, Daniel showed up at my parents' house, his demeanor a mix of anger and desperation. "Luna, please. I'm sorry for everything. I just wanted to make things better for us. Can't we work this out?" I looked at him coldly. "It's too late for apologies. You've crossed too many lines. The inheritance isn't cash. It's property, and you can't touch it." His face fell as he realized that his plans had failed. He tried to salvage what he could, but I was resolute. The damage was done, and I was determined to move forward. As the legal proceedings continued, Daniel faced mounting pressure. The investigation into his theft of the property documents revealed his attempts to exploit the situation. The news spread, and his reputation, as well as that of his parents, began to suffer. They faced public embarrassment and financial troubles, adding to the pressure on them. Through all this, I remained focused on my goal. The divorce proceedings were initiated, and I was determined to protect my inheritance and my peace of mind. It was clear that Daniel's greed and manipulation had led to his downfall, and I was determined to see this through to the end. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. With Daniel's attempts to manipulate the situation exposed, the pressure on him mounted. I was determined to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult it was. My lawyer and I worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in order and that the property was legally protected. One afternoon, while I was sorting through some paperwork at my mother's house, the phone rang. It was my lawyer, and his voice was grave. "Luna, I have some news. Daniel has been arrested for theft." The shock hit me hard. I had hoped that the legal process would bring resolution, but hearing that Daniel had been arrested was a stark reminder of how far things had deteriorated. My lawyer explained that Daniel's attempt to sell the property illegally had been uncovered, leading to his arrest. It was a significant step in holding him accountable for his actions. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the situation was finally being addressed, but sadness over the collapse of what had once been a hopeful relationship. Despite everything, I had hoped for a different resolution, one where we could have resolved our issues amicably. As news of Daniel's arrest spread, his parents were thrust into the spotlight. They faced public embarrassment and financial difficulties as a result of their son's actions. Their desperation was palpable, and they reached out to me in a final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. I received a heartfelt plea from Daniel's mother. "Luna, please, we're in dire straits. We need your help. Daniel's actions have destroyed us, and we don't know what to do." I listened to her voice on the phone, but I felt no inclination to offer assistance. The damage done to my family and myself was too great. I had endured enough manipulation and greed from Daniel and his family. I had to prioritize my well-being and peace of mind. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," I said firmly. "What Daniel did was wrong, and I need to move forward. This chapter of my life is over." The finality of my decision was both empowering and challenging. I knew that cutting ties with Daniel and his family was the right choice for my own healing. It was time to move on and start fresh, away from the toxicity that had plagued my life for so long. With Daniel's arrest and the property secured, the next step was to sell my family home. It was a painful decision, but one that was necessary for my own peace. My mother and I found a new place to live, far from the memories and drama that had haunted us. The move was a symbolic gesture, a way to leave the past behind and begin anew. As we settled into our new home, I felt a sense of relief and liberation. The weight of the past was lifting, and I could finally focus on rebuilding my life. The inheritance, once a source of conflict, became a symbol of my strength and resilience. It was a reminder of the importance of self-respect and personal boundaries. In the end, the story of my marriage and the inheritance was not just about greed and manipulation. It was about finding the courage to stand up for myself and make choices that aligned with my values. It was about reclaiming my life and my happiness, despite the challenges and heartache. Daniel's arrest marked the end of a painful chapter, but it also signaled the beginning of a new journey. I was determined to embrace this new chapter with hope and optimism. The lessons learned from this experience would stay with me, guiding me toward a future where I could find true peace and fulfillment. As I reflect on everything that happened, I realized that the most important lesson was the value of self-respect and the strength to set boundaries. It was a difficult journey, but one that ultimately led me to a place of greater clarity and self-awareness. And so, with the past behind me and a new chapter ahead, I look forward to a future where I can build a life filled with positivity and growth. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it for the chance to create a life where I can truly be at peace.